I'm back with another stream for you guys. Unlike our previous streams with me, this is not Feisty Ferret specific, so hopefully anyone who's interested in any part of the game design process for any of the games is joining right now. You can always watch it later if not, but I wanted to talk to you guys about what it means to be a game developer and how to become one a little bit, giving you some inside scoop on the industry. Because I think that there's a lot of mysticism sometimes with the game development industry. You just kind of wake up one day and this game has been magically released and who knows what process went behind it, but now you have a game and you can play it. But there's actually a lot of hard work that goes into making a game and a lot of different types of people and types of work that go into it collaboratively. So I hope that you guys are inspired by this whole E-line process to be part of the game design industry, and hopefully this will give you some more information if you do want to make it into your career. So Nat is also joining us for this one, which I'm super excited about.
Yay! I'm so glad to be here, Kaela. Thanks for having me for this talk. I too once thought it was a big mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I always like to say about this is this is like the long game. And you don't have to decide now, but it's really helpful to know where you might fit if you were to join a professional game making team. So I loved that you're introducing folks to this because it's just gives you a little bit more clarity on what we do and what you might do as you figure out like what you're good at and what you like to do. Because really like these roles are about what people like doing, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. There are roles for literally any type of person with any interest in the game design industry. Basically, the only requirements are that you like games and you want to learn. And we'll get into some of those jobs later in the talk. But first, let's talk about for each of us what it really means to be a game developer. So for me, being a game developer just means that you're involved with the game making process in any way. And this can be from anything from programming to project management, from creating the concepts to actually coding or doing level design. All of these people are game developers. So it's a very broad term, and it basically just means you work on games in any capacity. What does it mean to you, Nat?
That's a good question. I agree. I think any contact you have with a game that is in process, anything creative you do to contribute to a game being released makes you a game developer. Now, when I first joined the game industry, I thought that being a game developer meant you had to know how to do programming. Because what I thought being a game developer was sitting down, typing a bunch of code, and then a game shows up from the code somehow through magic.
Magically.
Exactly. But I now actually really value the contributions of folks who program and folks who do other kinds of things on a game, like art, and also that magical role we call the producer, which I think you're going to get into that later, right?
Yeah, the next slide was actually what kind of careers can you have in game dev? So since you started, Nat, can you list off a few of them for us?
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on how detailed you want to get. Because we have these different areas of a game that folks will work on. And we often broadly divide them up into, we have engineering, we have art, we have writing, and then there's also sort of a leadership box that people fall in, who manage teams, help the game continue to stay on its schedule. And then there's also testing. And then within those various like big categories, there are smaller delineations. And then of course, I'm leaving out one of the huge ones, which is of course just game designer, which is a whole other thing that's sometimes left out of the picture because isn't game designer everything? But in the game industry, it's actually a specific role. So within all of these categories, we have, for example, with artists, you can divide those into concept artist, technical artist, environmental artist, all kinds of different activities, especially if the game is bigger. Similarly, with writing, you can divide it into someone who is a game writer that writes dialogue, or a narrative designer who designs the entire story arc of the game. So it's really almost everything. Like, I almost want to say, like, is there any person who like can't do or shouldn't do game design? Because it feels like there's so many roles and opportunities for people.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. There is absolutely anybody who wants to. Again, we'll get into some of the advice that we have for people who want to join later, but just so you have it up front, really you just have to be at all creative, very interested in games, and someone who loves to learn. That is the biggest one. You have to be willing to learn all the time because the games industry is a wild and crazy place to work in where things are ever changing. So that's
Yes.
really the only requirements. But as long as you have that passion, you can totally be in the game industry.
One thing I'll add to that is a common way of learning in the game industry is from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And now I have seen some amazing solo indie game devs who sit down, they barricade themselves in a cave. 10 years later, they emerge and there's an incredible video game. That's totally a viable path. And we welcome people to be solo devs.
Mm-hmm.
But most game devs learn and work with big teams or small teams. They like working with other people because of what you can learn from someone with a different skill set, personality, and attitude.
Yes, absolutely. Teamwork is definitely something important to be willing to do if you're going to come into a company setting to work on a game. So let's talk a little bit about what our roles are in the industry. Nat, you want to go first? Do you want me to?
You go first.
Okay. So right now my role in the industry is student, but outside of that, before I came to grad school and after I finished grad school, I'm a programmer by trade. That is my primary goal. And I can be a generalist programmer, but like we said, there are many different subsets that you can fall into under each broad category. So my preferences lean towards gameplay programming, so the mechanics of what you actually do. And my absolute favorite thing to do in games is AI design. I love making enemies or companions that you interact with and do interesting things and act intelligently and realistically. That is just the most fun part of game design for me personally. I also really love doing systems design because that allows me to do things like UI and how the user interacts with the game, and also things like setting up narrative and the ability to add story to games. So those are really my big interests as far as programming goes. And I'm also a game designer, so I like to come up with the concepts and do the documentation for that, guide other people in the vision. One thing that you will learn during this talk is there is no ideas guy in the industry. Even if you have a lot of creative ideas, that's not where the journey ends. You have to create all of this information and be able to pitch it to a team and have them also realize your vision and be able to see the same game that you're picturing in your head, kind of the process that we're going through with Feisty Ferrets and Dawn City. So those are my roles in the industry. Nat, what are your roles?
Yeah. So I obviously, one of the things I do is teach because I'm here at Endless Studios in that capacity. But when I'm not teaching, I am narrative focused by trade. I am a writer. So my personal role on any design team is going to be related to doing narrative design. I'm also someone that likes to kind of gather and organize people. So I tend to fall into leadership roles like creative director. And that is because I really enjoy collaborative creativity and helping everyone come to a shared vision for what a game is. Um, my writing skills are pretty broad, so I can fall into kind of any of those roles that I was talking about earlier, from big to small. But I really like the big picture. I love to concept, which that's a term where we're just saying like start with nothing and come up with a game idea. And some people are really good at that. And it is a little bit of an ideas man intention. But then the result of concepting is you actually have to come up with what would be a path from that idea into an implementation. So
Yeah.
in that situation, you and I might even work together where I'd concept a game and then talk to you about systems design
Mm-hmm.
and adjust my concept to reflect what's possible in a systems sense, or even maybe in a game design sense, if you put that hat on in a project that I was coming up with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the really important thing to know about concepting and doing that part of game design is that you have to be willing to take your initial vision, and once you have your team, if you're not going the solo dev route, to adjust that vision. And even if you are a solo dev, you're going to find out that things about your game are fun and things are not fun that you thought would be. And fitting your idea, usually a narrative idea, is the starting seed that we have. Fitting all of that into actual mechanics and things that the player does is a really big process and a long process versus just coming up with a very core idea.
Right. And I will say that one of the reasons I love that process so much is I personally somehow really enjoy cutting things.
Really?
Yes, I do. I somehow like it feels like I'm making something elegant. And I'm a mathematician originally. I majored in math when I was in college, and I studied proofs and did pure math, which is all set theory. And I love the kind of movement from like a big picture creative idea into something elegant. And you have to cut things to create elegance in a system. And I am just so obsessed with that. And my favorite thing is when you bring someone in the team that helps you do that. So for me, and I've met people who are good at concepting, but they can't cut.
You
They're
get so
like,
attached to your idea.
exactly, like I have this vision, you're screwing up my vision. Right? Like, but it's
Get
so much fun
protective over
to
it. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. It's really hard, and so many aspects are hard. I mean, every job has its challenges. I'm sure that you have your own set of challenges in AI systems design and game design. I mean, if I may ask, I know I'm going on a slight tangent, but what would be one of the main challenges that you have in that realm?
I think some of the challenges with those roles are being able to plan for the big picture. Right now, we're starting to make a game that's very combat AI heavy, and already, even in our prototyping phases, it's been difficult to create this system of behaviors that is expandable enough and adjustable enough to fit multiple different kinds of AI that we're going to want in the game, because we don't know yet, right? We're just prototyping. We start with these just a few type of AI, and then eventually we want to expand that to have like a whole bunch so that it's really interesting for the player, combining all the different behaviors to make an interesting combat situation. And the biggest part of AI for me is just being able to sit down and think through, like, okay, what is everything that I could possibly want my AI to do, and how do I make that in an elegant way? So I mean, it's the same challenge with systems design too, because when you're initially crafting a system, you don't necessarily know everything that you're going to want in the entire game. So that causes you, if you don't have enough foresight, you have to go back and refactor, which means just making changes that you didn't initially plan for. And that can be a really complicated and frustrating process. So just being able to plan ahead and think, okay, what could I possibly want in this kind of game? How can I account for all of that, or as much as I possibly can, so that I don't have to backtrack and do work on it later?
Oh, yes. That takes an organizational brain. Well,
It definitely
speaking of
does.
organization, you've organized this presentation wonderfully. So let's keep going and talk about the next slide.
Sure. So I think what I wanted to do next was kind of do a deep dive on each of the individual roles that we had brought up, so that you kind of, maybe you're not sure what you want to do in the games industry. And maybe this can give you a little bit more information about what we mean when we say all of these different terms. So starting with level designers, what do they do? So they do a lot of prototyping, and you can see in the middle picture on this slide, this is actually a picture of some prototyping, and it's what we call a paper prototype. So we're not even to the video game stage yet, right? This is all concrete things, material things that you can hold in your hands. But it's a really valuable way to test out game ideas without having to put in hours and hours of work on code and art assets. Paper prototyping is the foundation for creating a concept in the early stages, because it sounds like, I know it sounds weird, but you can really see how video game mechanics will work just by making them in paper form or and little animations and things like that, and just seeing, does this look okay? Does this feel good? Even if it's not the final product yet. They also do things like define the game rules. And this is kind of leaning into the fact that there's a lot of different subsets and categories that you can fall into in each thing. So, like level designers, if you have a general level design knowledge base, you can also be a game designer. And that's what the role would be that would define the rules of the game. If you're the one who concepts it or part of the team that concepts it, then you're deciding what exactly can the player do, what can't the player do, etc. You're also creating the environments and the puzzles. That's what we're doing in Dawn City Heist and in Feisty Ferrets. And that's really the core things that level designers do. But again, there's a bunch of things that they can do, like balancing the mechanics and making sure that those systems play well together, and even writing the narrative sometimes, depending on whether or not your team has the scope for a narrative specific person. They might just pass that task along to a level designer. So it's a very much jack of all trades thing in the industry, being a level designer. You have to have a little bit of knowledge in each thing, maybe a little bit of art skill, a little bit of programming skill, but nothing in depth. You just kind of have to be aware of all of the pieces and how to fit them together.
Yeah, and I think level designers are really a role where having an encyclopedic knowledge of games is so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that that's not helpful for every person who works on games. Um, but I've certainly known programmers who come into game projects who have a general knowledge of programming from a computer science background, who
Mm-hmm.
may know a good amount of games, but they're not deeply soaked in it. And
Yeah.
they can be functional in building the back end
Mm-hmm.
kind of underlying systems. But a level designer really takes their expertise from playing a ton of games and just cataloging all of these tools and tricks and conventions in the way you put things together so that they're beautiful, they're fun, they're engaging, they're compelling. And this is really something you kind of have to learn by intuition.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could read a book on it, but it's fundamentally something that you learn by playing and doing more than any other type of study, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's definitely one of the creative things. It's not necessarily artistic, but it is something that you have to have some creativity and certainly be able to envision yourself through the eyes of the player. Because one challenge with level design is you have all of the assets, all of the knowledge of this game at your fingertips, and when you're making these levels, you can't just assume that the player knows everything. You have to think about, how do I tell the player to go to this part of the map? How do I make this map so that it leads smoothly to where I want the player to go instead of the player getting lost? And so you really have to be able to put on like this improv cap kind of, and be able to just imagine that I don't know anything about this game. How can I make the player understand what I want them to do in this level?
Yes, and there's so many cool things with this. I just, as I've gotten more into it myself, I love how level designers use lighting, for
Mm.
example, to cue people to look in certain places in a room, to take a certain path through an environment. Um, it reminds me of actually, before COVID, I used to love going to haunted houses.
Yes, me too.
They use lighting the same way in haunted houses that they do in 3D level design.
Hmm.
They use lighting to draw your eye to a certain area of the room, and then they surprise you by having someone standing in a dark corner where you didn't naturally look. And then, of course, you're surprised when you scream, "Oh my gosh, there's a ghost there." I see stuff like that in games all the time. And I'm always just so admiring of level designers who put these constructions together that, it moves beyond just being like, okay, I have to build a room. So, like,
Hmm.
okay, this is a bedroom. So a bed would go here. But then thinking, given the story, where do I want someone to look in this room?
Hmm.
Color, lighting, the orientation of the furniture, all of that cues you to react in a particular way. It's environmental storytelling.
Yes, there is a
So
lot of love that goes into that. And I had no idea. I never noticed that about haunted houses, but I'm definitely going to be looking for it this October because that's
I
super cool.
know. Oh my gosh, I know. Well, when I figured that out, I started like, I kind of ruined haunted houses for myself because when I go in a room, I always look away from the light and then I see the person standing there.
You're
It's
too
like,
clever for them.
I figured their tricks out.
They can't scare you anymore. That's so funny. Okay, well, that's a lot of information about level design, but it should give you a good overview of what their actual role is and what the term level designer really means. So, if you're interested, if that's something that you want to do, what are some things that you can do now to start prepping for that if you think that it's something you could possibly want to do as a career? So, for all of these, I'm just going to give you right off the top, you're going to want to start building a portfolio. For every single job that's here in this presentation, you want a portfolio because a ton of people want to work in the games industry and a ton of people are going to be vying for every position that's available. So you want to show that you've put in the work, put in the time, you're willing to learn, and that you have some experience already. So creating a portfolio will really help with that, especially for level designers, because since they are such generalists, usually there are even more people looking for those positions. Since it's kind of, the thing is that it's considered like kind of at like the entry level, like if you want to get into the games industry, start by being a level designer, but that's so strange to me because it takes so much skill and knowledge to be able to pull it off. So it's a really weird juxtaposition there, but anyways, definitely you're going to want to do a lot of practice. So you're going to want to practice documentation. That's things like creating GDDs and LDDs. The GDD is, again, the game design document. If you have an idea, don't just write down like a paragraph about it. Really dive into it and show how you would tell a team, this is the vision that I want to make. People would love to see that on portfolios, that you have that experience with cataloging everything that all of the people on your team could possibly want to know. And for LDDs, it's kind of the same idea, but it's a level design document. So if you have some game design document, or even better, if you're taking from a game that already exists, like what if I made a level in, I don't know, Fallout? You could just make the same kind of documentation, but really for yourself. It's really just cataloging like, okay, this is what I want the player to experience. These are the puzzle types that I'm going to make. This is how I'm going to construct them. These are the assets I'm going to use. And having that kind of documentation would also be fantastic experience for you guys. As far as practicing level design, you might be thinking, well, where am I going to get the assets? How am I going to make levels without the things to make levels and all the assets, right? So there's a lot of free resources available. There's also, you can mod existing games like Fallout and Skyrim. You can absolutely make quests in them and do really cool things with that. But even in things like Unity, there are just tons of free assets available. As long as you're not making money off of them, it should be absolutely fine for you to just throw them into a level and try to make something that looks cool. And the last piece of advice that I will give for becoming a level designer and getting some experience under your belt is, even if you have a favorite game genre, it'll be way more interesting to potential employers and or anyone who looks at your portfolio if you have experience in making levels for multiple different kinds of games. So try to branch out and try things from different genres.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that is a good way to get into it if you're just getting started is to build your own Minecraft map.
Mm.
Um, Minecraft comes with a lot of onboard mechanics you can code up with pretty limited knowledge of programming. You don't have to take a big course to do it. And people build all kinds of games in Minecraft. You don't have to have a team to sit down and make something there. And it's a great experience to figure out how to move around in 3D, construct an environment to be interesting and fun. One thing I would recommend for folks who were taking that path is pick a type of game that you know and see if you can recreate it in Minecraft. You can
Mm.
pick a digital game, or you could even pick a board game. You could say, hey, I'm going to create chess in Minecraft. How do I make that? And just see where that takes you. So easy to do. Once you've gotten the basics down of thinking about that, like, I'm not just playing Minecraft, I'm making something. You can step from that step up into picking a platform like Unity or using something simple like Game Maker, which is 2D. You can get Unreal. Then you're going to be in the full development environment, and you can take your understanding of how to think, this is how you make something, instead of just how do you play, into a development environment and learn the interface so you can use that same mentality with the tools that are available there.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. Really, really support that. Definitely make a Minecraft thing before you start making your own completely creative things. All right, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is being an artist. So what do they do? It's kind of in the name, they make art, but there's a ton of different kinds of art that you can make as an artist. And sometimes, you'll be in a generalist role where you're making everything or nearly everything for a game. But there's also really specific roles where you're only making certain types of art. So there are things like characters and environment design and 2D sprite sheets, 3D modeling and texturing, the UI elements that are in the game. Even marketing is part of the game art team. So there's so much that you can do here. Even if you're not implementing the final products, concepting is a thing all by itself as well, where you're just making the ideas for characters and then someone else takes those and turns them into the actual fully rendered version. And there's a huge difference between all the different art styles. And you're going to want to figure out what your favorite art styles are and really lean into them to develop your own niche style, since this is another one where there's a lot of artists who want to make things for games. So having a way to distinguish your art is going to be really good for you. And also probably deciding whether you're more interested in 2D or 3D. There are certainly people who do both, but they're very different types of art, right? I mean, if you're making a 3D model, you're using completely different tools and completely different knowledge of shading and lighting and things like that than you would be with, say, making a sprite sheet, which, for example, could be a bunch of tiles that you place into a world. And that's all it is. It's just little squares that you can just kind of break up from that sheet. Or it could be like the animations, like every frame by frame animation, that's like a 2D sprite sheet. Whereas in 3D world, you would have to like rig the character and physically like move its body around, and it just gets exported in different ways. It's all very different processes between the different art styles and the different types of art that you can make. So there's a ton that you can do there. Whatever your skill set and your interests are, there's probably something in terms of game art that you can do.
Yeah. Art is one of those things where the more specialized you can be, the more likely you are to get a job. Because game teams look for specific styles and they really select a style. They select an artist based on, does this person's particular work have the ability to fit the mood that we're going for? One thing I will say about art in games is this is a role where it does benefit to get a college degree. There's a lot of general art knowledge that is very valuable, regardless of which one you specialize in. And then when you do specialize, it's very helpful to do it in a formal environment where you get critique from knowledgeable instructors. This is much more the case than for a level designer. I think a level designer could easily get a job on a team with a technical degree, although a college degree is always going to give you more education. But with artists, if you don't get a degree, you're going to be catching up with all of the work that the folks who did get degrees finished in those 4 years of just practicing, because art is about practice.
Definitely.
The one other thing I'll say about this as a career in games is being a concept artist is a very hard role to nab in games. And that is because concept art is something one person can do for a very large team. So roles like game designer, programmer, level designer, often large teams need multiple of those people. The larger the game is, the more of those people that you need. Say you have 20 levels, maybe 2 game designers, 2 level designers, right? But one person could do a huge amount of concept art for a larger game. And so I tend to tell people that concept art is awesome. You should totally do it. Enjoy the heck out of it. Do concept art for a passion project. do not try to make concept art your career in games, because you will be disappointed by the difficulty of getting a full-time role doing that job.
Mm. Yeah,
And
that's fair.
I say this because I teach at art schools, and all of my students want to be concept artists. And they are incredible artists. They are incredible. Their work is so amazing and I love it. And I also have to disappoint them and say, like, it's really hard to get a job doing this. But if you can specialize in a 2D or 3D art making pipeline, that's what's going to get you hired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
So if you want to get hired and you want some practice with some tools that could be really good on your resume in terms of things that employers want to know that you have experience with, things like Blender and ZBrush for 3D art and things like Illustrator and Procreate for 2D art would be really good. And I think at least Blender and maybe Procreate are free, so you can definitely dive into it. There's a lot of information on the internet on how to use those tools. The other thing, like I said, is defining your style. Same as Nat had said, you really want to stand out and have, instead of a lot of different styles, you want to really hone into one so that you, when you're sending out your portfolio to a bunch of places, then they know exactly what to expect in their own game. And if your art matches what they had envisioned for their game, they can look at it and be like, okay, this person is going to make exactly what we want. And there's a lot of different kinds of styles. So there's pixel art versus vector art. Illustrator would be great for vector art, and things like Procreate, or even I think there's one online that's free called Piskel, would be good for pixel art. You can do things very realistically, or you can lean more into cartoony kinds of things. The things that kind of lean into that, like low poly things, with which basically means like less polygons, less triangles to be rendered, can lean into the cartoony, and high poly things with a lot of shapes in them to be rendered is more realistic, because you're just getting more curves and more of the shape is being shown. So it just depends on what draws your interest, but we do have some cool pictures down at the bottom from our own Feisty Ferrets team. So the first picture is of an untextured model that I believe is rigged. It's a picture of it moving. And then we have on the last picture in the slide with the pink background, you probably recognize the little dude from our game. That's the same model, but once he's been textured. So they have very different feels, right? It's different stages of the process, but same artist, and it's like kind of midway through the process and then finished with the texturing process. Same art, but different vibes in that process pipeline. And then in the middle here, we have from the 2D art team that we have our banner for Feisty Ferrets. And it's interesting because, you know, it's the same idea, this ferret that's cute and bubbly and adorable, but the art styles are different, even just going from 2D to 3D. So you can see a little example of how, even though we have the same idea on this art team for the same game, there's still going to be differences between that 2D and that 3D specialization.
Yeah. Just a couple minor things to add here. If I were going to try to do a little bit of 3D art making on my own outside of a college degree program, I would get a tool like Blender,
Mm.
and I would try to make something like this ferret and put it on the Unity Asset Store.
Mm.
It's a marketplace where you can share your work, and if people like it, you can offer it as a free download. Or you can try to sell an asset that you created and make a little money on it if it works really well and people like it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really fun way to set a deadline and a set of goals for yourself in creating. And, you know, I see fun things on there all the time that people have made. Like, my favorite is the like low poly set of food. Like, I just love those. And I'm like, if I was going to learn this, and I am not a 3D modeling person, I'm not an artist. But if I wanted to learn, I would say, okay, I'm going to make like a set of food or a set of flowers and try to model those into a pack that I could share so other people could use it.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I wanted to get into 2D art, and I was sort of figuring that out, one thing I can tell most people in academic institutions, it's often the case that Creative Cloud, which is Adobe's suite of software, it includes Illustrator. is often offered for free through schools, or you can get a student account that is very cheap or funded by your school. So folks should look into that and ask your school if they have Creative Cloud, or you can say, I want to use Adobe Illustrator. Is it something I can get through school? Your teacher will look into it for you, or they will know. And that's a great way to get access to that without buying it yourself. You definitely want to learn Illustrator. I mean, you could just do Piskel and be a genius pixel artist. That is available for free online. It's Piskel.
Mm-hmm.
So you can Google that right now and start playing with it. But knowing any Adobe software, Illustrator, Photoshop is really going to get you far down the road of being an excellent digital artist. So I recommend that everybody get familiar with those.
Yeah, thank you, Nat. I think that's a lot of great information. And putting it back to your idea for uploading things onto the asset store, I think that's fantastic. And if you do that for free, for pretty much any of these roles as well, varying amounts, but pretty much all of them, anything open source that you do as a passion project will look really good to employers or to schools that you might want to get into for college and things like that. Because then the person can just go and look at your work. You know, they don't have to go through your portfolio or traverse this whole website. They can just literally be like, what have you made? I can go download it and use it myself. And that's a really awesome thing to be able to show off. So great idea.
Yeah.
Okay, my favorite one. What is it to be a programmer? Yeah. So what do they do? To me, they make the game run. Level designers are the people who take the pieces and put them all together. Artists are the ones who make it look pretty. Programmers are the ones who make the things actually happen in the world. So there's a bunch of different kinds of programmers, which you kind of touched on. You can be a generalist who makes the gameplay and does that kind of logic. You can make the systems on the back end. You can do the tools that the developers will be using. You can be a graphics programmer doing really cool effects with things like shaders. You can do the AI, which is my favorite. Definitely recommend. You can even be a UI programmer that's setting up how people interact with the screens that they have to interact with. I am just going to flow right into what I can do. So to become a programmer, this is another one where I think that having a degree is going to be really important. Something that Nat already touched on is that a lot of people come into the games industry with just a comp sci background, and that's cool. Like you can totally get into games somewhat if you just have a computer science degree purely. But there is still a little bit of creativity that you really should have as a games programmer. You want to have that spark of, okay, this would be fun for like, this is how we're going to make it interesting and not just getting the logic done, but making it like really nice for the player to interact with. And so I think that having like a game specific programming degree can be really helpful with that. But again, programmers are very high demand. So you can probably still get it done with just a computer science degree in general as well. But you will probably want to know C++. It is kind of the premier language for game development at this stage. Rust is another one that's kind of on the rise, which is similar to C++, but it's very user-friendly from what I've heard. I don't know it, but apparently it's very good. But definitely C++ would be a good starting place for anyone who wants to be a game-specific programmer. And practicing making little games similar to level design is going to be the best thing to put on your portfolio. Contributing to open source things like on GitHub or just having personal projects in general, showing that you have put in the time, you know how to do different aspects of programming, and you're willing to learn are really the best traits that you can have as a games programmer.
So let's talk about how people typically learn programming. A lot of people run into it in high school. And I feel like a common language that people encounter in high school or in game making programs that are not Endless Studios is Python.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that I have done a little bit with Python. Is that useful for games? You know, what is the connection between Python and C++? How are they different? I wanted to ask you to fill that pathway in a little bit because I think it's common.
Yeah, so Python is a really common language for people to learn. And yes, right off the bat, it is absolutely useful to know other languages like Python in the games industry. Honestly, the more languages that you know, the better, as long as you're actually fluent in them. That's just going to make it seem like you can learn even more. Python is really good for doing some things in games that C++ isn't as great at, and like there's just trade-offs there. But C++ is really like the core one that you want to know at this stage. But yeah, you can absolutely start with Python. And because they're both object-oriented programming languages, they kind of translate well. Like I started with Python and Java throughout my entire undergrad experience and didn't even start with C++ until afterwards. And it was really easy to learn once you have the basics of that object-oriented programming language in general. Then it's really easy to translate that into the other languages. It's just C++ has a lot more like built-in functionality for like I don't want to explain it all just like in the middle
Yeah.
of this presentation, but there's things
Yep.
like pointers and like they just allocate memory a lot better, and it like there's just a lot of things that make C++ faster and easier for game development. But yes, general rule, Python is a great starting point.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, to learn programming, the thing you really want to do is understand the underlying fact of how logic works.
Mm-hmm.
And Python is a really great language to understand things like if then, or a variable,
Mm-hmm.
or an algorithm. What is an algorithm? Those are concepts that it doesn't matter what language you're working in, it's something that you need to know. It's
Mm-hmm.
like the larger theory of programming. And then, sort of like in spoken languages, we can have something we mean to say, and then we need to speak it in a particular language. And then you learn the actual syntax, which is exactly how things have to be capitalized or not, curly braces, dots, hashtag, things like that, how those all work together to send a message to the computer of what you want to do. So
Yeah.
people can learn theory and the general mental pathways and then route into C++ to actually like take up like the most powerful game making tool.
Yeah, definitely.
I have one more thing to add, which is, again, if you weren't in a college program yet to study game programming or computer science and you wanted to get started on this stuff, there are tons of places to learn how to program online.
Mm-hmm.
Code Academy is one that I've heard a lot of people like. Code Academy is not free, but I believe that you will get your money's worth, and it's not terribly expensive to buy a course on there in the language that you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what Code Academy lacks is that teamwork component. And I think one of the most valuable things of working on a real game or joining a college program is actually doing programming in the context of a project, which is
Mm-hmm.
very different from messing around in a programming tutorial.
Yes, definitely. Um, I would say that the big difference there is, breaking a project into chunks. A lot of programming work in general is you just solo projects, even in school. Like it's just you working on something. But something that's different in the games industry is you have to really compartmentalize things and not block other people. If you're on a big team and someone's working on the player's mechanics and someone else is working on the AI, but they both move the same way, so they have a shared component there, you really have to be able to, okay, I don't want this to live on both of them because that's not very, it's just not like storage wise, why would you write the same code twice, but I also don't want to be like locked into, I can't use it because someone else has it checked out right now. So having that experience with working in a team setting and not just like looking on your own little screen and fiddling around with your own stuff privately, it just holds you accountable and really sets you up for the industry standards that they want to see as a programmer. So yeah, I think that that's a really good point. Something else that I wanted to point out is you might notice a bit of a difference in the picture on this slide. So this is what a programmer will be looking at day to day, right? It's just code. It's kind of just words and numbers. And that's really different from the last two slides. Level designers start out sometimes with paper and prototyping, and they do a lot of documentation. But at the end of the day, they're probably still going to be looking at least part of the final product, right? For the game, like they can always keep in mind what the vision is because They're creating the environments, they're messing with and playing with the player controller and things like that. So they're always really in that game world. And then the artists are the ones who are making what the game world looks like. So of course they have the vision in their head at all times. But a programmer is looking at code a lot of the time. So that can be like a little bit like you can kind of forget what the end goal is supposed to be. So it's really helpful when you're a programmer to do things in little steps and then play test it, see if it's working, get you back into that game world, and then come back. And that can be really helpful for you guys starting out too. Like if you're just sitting there coding for hours and looking at this screen, it could be really boring, or you could just get frustrated because something's not working. So make sure that you do it in little increments and then just go back to the game world, see what you changed and what it did to the world, because that will make it a lot more engaging, I think, for people who are just learning.
Well, it also helps you know like what the thing that you just typed is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really easy to get sucked into making a bunch of changes to the code. You hop into the game world after an hour and there's a bug and you have no idea which of the 20 changes you made is causing it, or if maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
this change and this change interacting with each other. So you got to
Yeah.
stay grounded. It's like you're in, this is an imaginary reality that's even more imaginary than the imaginary reality of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to like come out of imaginary reality one into imaginary reality two. Anyway, it feels more real because you can actually see the game.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the next one is the magical land of producing. It's basically people management, right, Nat?
Yes. This is the one that I feel like most people don't know about.
Yeah, it's very much this unicorn that's kind of hidden in the closet. Like we don't talk about them, but they're very important and we love them very much. They mean a lot to us.
Yeah.
So, what do they do? What is a producer? So, producing the game is their job. And that basically means helping people resolve their blockers, ensuring that people are working efficiently and collaboratively, doing things like hosting external playtests and getting people outside of the studio to do things for you. Just everything that could possibly be involved with the communication pipeline is the producer's job to make sure that it's running smoothly. So, blockers, just for some context, a lot of the times the industry will break things down into tasks that you can take on. And if you can't achieve a task because, like for the programming example, someone has a component checked out that you need on your end for this task, that's a blocker, right? So it would be, you could talk to the producer, say, hey, this person's had this component checked out for a few hours. I really need to get this task done. What can I do about that? And that helps with resolving conflicts sometimes as well, because we're all really passionate about this game, right? We all want it to get to the best that it can be, but we sometimes might not always communicate the best ways and we might not always have the same vision. So it's kind of the producer's job to step in and be like, okay, how can we resolve this? How can we get things running smoothly again? And also making sure that people are working efficiently, getting their tasks done, working together to get tasks done, asking for help when they need it, things like that. That's really the role of a producer. And they're very important. If you try to run a game studio without producers, you will be sad. It will not be a fun experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, you need somebody who's in that organizational role to it's like that person creates kind of a container for all the creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And, games are fundamentally about creativity and collaborative creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And creativity is by nature, it's unwieldy, it's unpredictable, it's wild, it's chaotic, and that's good because we need it to be like that for people to come up with innovative ideas, for people to find the fun, and for
Mm-hmm.
people to really like express themselves in making a game. They need to not be constrained.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
to accommodate that, someone has to kind of be there to help translate that into a process where everybody feels safe and communicates,
Mm-hmm.
and everything is actually kind of progressing along the timeline of we want to finish this game by this date. um, to get that done, we're going to have to kind of hit this milestone by this day and that milestone by that day. Someone's got to kind of oversee that and kind of hold that schedule in their mind. And without that person, the chaos of creativity would reign and we would never finish anything by a deadline, which might be fine in like the short term, but then we do want to have a sense of accomplishment at some point that we actually got something done.
Yes, honestly, it's a miracle even with producers that games get finished at all.
I know. I was about to say, like, I'm like, oh, they get it done by this date. And we all know that games get pushed back constantly.
Yep. And that's fine because, you know, we want our developers to not be under immense pressure for time, and we want to have the best game that we possibly can. So just a heads up, whenever a game gets pushed back, I promise it is for the benefit of the game and not the benefit of you personally. It's not an attack on you. We just need more time to get you the best product that we can.
Yeah.
So for the producers, I am going to go over this really briefly since we're running out of time and I want to talk about the rest of the slides. But what you can do very briefly, at the core, work on your communication skills. Any opportunity you have to just like talk to people, do public speaking, anything like that, stepping into leadership roles, do that and that will help you. Also familiarizing yourself with agile methods, which you can Google. They're very important to know, and practicing documentation of things like tasks on platforms like Monday, Jira, Excel. You don't have to be super fluent in them, but just having seen them before even and kind of understanding the layout will help you as a producer. And did you have anything to add to that, Nat?
No, let's do quality assurance.
Yeah, I think this one is the one that gets forgotten the most. Like, producers aren't really spoken about, but we know that someone's in charge of the schedule, right? We just don't know what they're called or what they really do in their day-to-day moments. But quality assurance is kind of like pushed under the rug and like sometimes not even considered part of the development process, which I highly disagree with. These guys are so important. So what do? They assure that the quality of the final product is up to our standards. So that mostly includes playtesting the game. And that might sound like a lot of fun to you. Trust me, it is not a fun job. You are trying to break this game. You are trying to find everything that's wrong with it, and that is a tedious process. You are not playing this game for fun. You are trying to find absolutely every flaw and then logging those flaws, performing like intense tests on them. Yes, you're playing a game, but you are not playing it for the enjoyment. You are playing it to pound out every single thing wrong with it and get that back to the people who can fix it before it gets shipped to the players.
I will say I've met certain people who, to them, that sounds really fun.
Oh my gosh, I cannot do it. I did performance on one of my last projects, and that includes some play testing, and it's like, oh my gosh, how many times do I have to play the same level?
Yeah, I know. It's so repetitive. I could never do it. I've met people, though, who just, they're like, I'm going to break this. Just watch me do it. And they're relentless. Like they never stop. They never get bored. You know, it's the same personality that does speed running.
That's true. That's true. So if you're one of those people, you might be interested in this role in the games industry. So what can you do to do that? Practice playing games. And I know that sounds silly. Like, of course you're going to go play video games. But I mean, really play those games. Figure out, memorize the layout of the level. Try to find bugs. Try to make bugs if you can. Like out of thin air, they'll just appear. If you try hard enough, I promise, every game can be broken. It's a challenge at this point. I challenge you to break your favorite game. And that, I mean, it's not going to, there's not really a portfolio or a resume that you can make for quality assurance, but being able to have that skill set of, okay, I'm playing this not for engagement and enjoyment, but I'm really trying to find the bugs, and being able to talk about that in an interview, I think would really help you land the gig.
The other thing I will say about quality assurance and, you know, trying to break a level or breaking a game is if you know a little bit how games are put together, you will also have a better hypothesis in your mind about where and how to dig up bugs and break the game. I've seen people in speedrunning videos talk about this who are themselves members of the game industry. And because they know, you know, what the process was of putting together that level, they're able to extrapolate certain assumptions like, if I poke around at the seams on this wall, I might be able to slip into another part of the level because I imagine I'm in a map that has multiple sections of one area. So I can connect with another part of the area based on my hypothesis of how this map was assembled. And so generally just participating in the game making process, maybe looking over the shoulder of a level designer or trying level design yourself without necessarily professionalizing is a good way to get information about what are you trying to break? What could possibly break? Things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. All right, so I'm just going to really briefly run over leads because they're basically the top dogs in each of these categories that we've talked about. They're still programmers, artists, level designers, etc., but they are the ones who are in charge of each discipline. So if you imagine that producers are in charge of managing everyone in the entire studio, leads are in charge of being the main people that the producers talk to and the one who all of their subordinates talk to. So if I'm the lead programmer, I might have 5 other programmers who work under me, and I'm in charge of communicating with them, giving them their tasks, helping them out if they get stuck on something. If the producer, if I am just a basic programmer and I'm having trouble because one of the animations has like a weird frame, then I can go to my lead and be like, hey man, this animation is weird, and that lead can go to the producer then and be like, hey, can you go talk to the art lead and ask them to fix this frame thing that we found? And then the producer goes to the art. So it's this whole pipeline of communication, and it just helps everything run a lot smoother. So being a lead just basically means that you're the same that you were before, but you have extra responsibilities on tops, and you're there to support your entire team. So this is another one where the most that you can do is really just take the opportunities to go for leadership roles, do communication skill practice. If you're working on projects, you can write out your plan for each task and really think about, instead of just diving in, being able to catalog what will my process be and what are the steps I'll need to do, how long do I think it'll take. Those are the skills that a lead in each discipline needs to have. And moving on to a little bit more fun from us, Nat, why and how did we get into the industry? You want to start?
Sure. That's a really good question. I started working in games through tabletop.
Oh.
I still work in tabletop. And I designed a board game through a board game design competition called Kudo Plays, which is based in Central Illinois. And I won some awards with my co-designer for that title. I never actually published that game. I'm still looking for a publisher for that one because that's often the way of your first game. It's a great product, but oftentimes it's a little bit hard to sell. And I moved on from there to writing tabletop RPGs. And in the midst of that, I started teaching narrative design because I have a grad degree in creative writing. And through teaching narrative design on the university level, I hooked up with Eline Media to teach game design and make games with them. So my entry into the industry was very much through the very company that is behind Endless Studios. I'm still here making games and teaching games. And when I'm not working with Eline, I publish tabletop RPGs. I have one out now called Business Wizards, which is a game about pretending to be magical middle management. I've got more coming out. I have a short one coming out in an anthology, and then we'll be doing another full-length title similar to Business Wizards in 2022.
Hey.
That's very indie publishing, which is the best part of the tabletop world, is the indie publishers who put out these sort of innovative RPG titles. I just love it. It's totally my passion. In games, video games, because I have a background in tech through majoring in math, it was easy for me to adapt my creativity into working with tools like Unity. So really anywhere where I can be like both technical and also creative, I feel like I thrive. And the game industry was kind of a magnet that just sucked me in. But
That's
what about you,
awesome.
Kaela?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome journey and really shows that like you can get started from anything. I mean, you have all these different backgrounds and then suddenly you ended up in games. That's so awesome to me. Um, for me, how and why I got into the industry. So I, funny enough, wasn't really allowed to play video games as a kid. It was just something that my parents didn't think was good for me. And so I think when I turned like 13, I was finally allowed to buy Skyrim, and that was my first real video game that I played. And I just became totally enveloped and I lost myself in the world and I started playing more games, and they just gave so much meaning to my life and taught me so many things. Games like Undertale were really influential in just like teaching me to like be kind and like not make assumptions about people and things. And I just thought that was so awesome that games have the power to do that. So that's really what inspired me to make games. I really didn't have any tech background at that stage because I was still in high school. So I think I took one coding course in high school and I was like, okay, that's it. I'm going to make games and I'm going to program for them. So I basically just decided I'm going to go to school for it. So I went to undergrad, got my degree, moved on and went to grad school, and here I am with my first published game on Steam that just came out, Snow Painters. Again, you guys should go download it. It's getting pretty
Yes.
positive reviews, so we're really excited about that. And yeah, I really was just inspired by playing games and falling absolutely in love with them and the fact that they can have such strong messages that really connect with people. And I just decided right then and there, I want to make games. So here I am doing it.
Oh my God. I am obsessed with your commitment. It's so good.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. I cannot wait to check out Snow Painters.
It's really short, of course, because we're a small team and we didn't have that much time to work on it. But I think what we came up with is really well polished. So,
Yes, I am about that. Like, remember I said I like to cut. So I'm
true.
always like, cut it down and make what you keep really good.
Yes,
So
yes, that is the goal. All right. So, what advice would we give people who want to get into the industry? I would say I've given you a little bit already with the portfolio reminders. You have to have a portfolio if you want to get into the industry. You also have to practice and just be willing in general to learn new things because the games industry is always changing. There's always new technology coming out, and you're just going to really have to be on your toes to keep up with it. Even once you're in the industry, you still have to be constantly learning. So having that passion of learning, being willing to put in the practice, and honestly making hundreds of really bad, really tiny games. And yes, I mean it. Make really bad games because every developer who's become a great developer didn't start with a rock star title. They made a ton of things that are absolutely terrible and they learned so much from that process. Failure is like the gold of this industry because every time that you fail at something that you are achieving to do, you learn a little bit about your limits, game limits in general, what you can achieve and what you can't achieve. And you're going to take all those lessons into your next project and you're going to know so much more about yourself, your team's capabilities, what you can achieve, the kinds of games that you want to make, what inspires you to work really hard. And eventually you'll get to the point where suddenly you're not making bad games anymore, but you have to make those bad games first.
I agree with that. I mean, another word for those is trash games, which I'm just a huge fan of trash games. I love it. And I would add to that that I think a really good way to make that happen for yourself is to do game jams.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because you can certainly just work on trash games on your own. But a piece of advice I would give is give yourself a little bit of structure by setting a deadline, joining a program like Endless Studios, or otherwise working on a project that has a limited time. And that is because it's so easy to languish and work and, oh, I'm going to finish it in the next 6 months and, oh, it needs this and that. And what ends up happening is it's never done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you may have a great vision and be slowly working on it, but really, if you want to get into the industry, I assume that you want it to happen relatively soon. And you need that proliferation of bad games to exist before you can really make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, game jams are a great way to set aside a weekend to make something terrible. When it's done, it exists and you can put it in your portfolio and learn and grow from it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that game jams accomplish that I think is also really important, and it's my last piece of advice, is that you have to find situations that feel safe.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is because the game industry is collaborative, the collaboration has to feel good to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean there won't be conflict, but you have to be able to have conflict in a way that makes you feel okay leaving the situation. So it was like, we really butted heads about that level design issue. And the creative director decided to take Kaela's approach. As long as I leave that conversation where I didn't feel bullied, I can
Mm.
go back and have another argument with you later.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many good situations and so many bad situations. And if you end up in a situation where you feel bullied and you're not feeling safe, what ends up happening is you won't remain in the industry because
Mm.
eventually you'll be so upset you'll end up quitting your job. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always tell people find a situation where you feel good collaborating, where you feel good having conflict. And then you're going to stay with your job, you're going to stay with your creativity. And I mean, that's something that you can iterate on in game jams because
Mm-hmm.
people get toxic teams in game jams. It happens. And that helps you recognize when a group has a bad culture. So you can look for a group that has a good culture.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really important.
Absolutely. There are a lot of negative cultures in the games industry. And I think that conflict, has such a negative connotation, but it is really healthy to be able to have conflict in a positive way because sometimes that's what's best for the game, right? Like I've been saying, we all want this game to be the absolute best that it can be. We might not always agree on how that can get achieved, but you want to work in a place that considers your ideas, values your ideas, even if they don't agree with them, takes them into consideration, and even meets you halfway and collaborates with you instead of just shutting you down. So
Exactly.
I think that's great. There is one more slide that I'm just going to run through really quickly since we are over time, but I just wanted to give a little bit of information about what the industry is like in general, and then we're going to cut it from there. So indie versus AAA teams. These are some terms that are tossed around a lot, right? Like, what does that even mean? So you can basically think of it as indie is small, AAA is big. And when I say big, I mean massive scale productions. Anything that you see, Red Dead Redemption is like a huge AAA team. GTA, same company, AAA. There are so many huge titles, Call of Duty, anything like that, where it's very realistic graphics and very big games that have hours and hours of gameplay. Those are probably going to be coming from AAA teams. And in those AAA teams, you have all of those really niche roles, right? Like we were talking about earlier, you can be a generalist of things, but you can also be really specific in your roles. And if you're working on a AAA team, you're going to have a really niche thing that you were hired to do. And that can be really great because it can be exactly what you're passionate about. You don't have to worry about sometimes having to work on things that you're not that interested in. You're really getting hired for exactly what you want to do. Whereas in indie, on the reverse side, it's really small teams. You might actually have a big game in the end, but you might be working for an even longer amount of time, or you might have a smaller product at the end. And it's probably not going to be hyper realistic graphics. It could be, but it's probably not.
Yeah.
Um, the good thing about working in an indie studio, though, even though you have to be generally more of a generalist, you have a lot more direct impact. So if there's, hundreds or even thousands of voices at this company saying, well, I think the game should do this, blah, 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 that's probably just going to get all mixed in. Whereas at an indie studio, you probably have some amount of weight in this discussion of what the game should be and where that vision should go. And I really like that personally. I prefer indie
Yeah.
studios myself. Um,
Yeah. Kaela, one time we used to teach, of course, Endless Studios was an in person iteration years ago. And we
what?
did, I know, we actually saw each other in real life. We did a field trip to Avalanche Studios,
Hmm.
which is the makers of the Just Cause series.
Yeah.
And there was a lecture very much like the one we're giving now. And the the artist, and a 3D artist did a talk who just does the heads.
Wow.
So there's
Now
tons of
that's niche.
NPCs, super niche. And his
Yeah.
whole talk was about how he textures people's noses and skin and like around here, like all of these layers he uses to make this look hyper realistic. Now that guy was such a nerd of this whole like 3D pipeline he uses to like make realistic faces. No
Mhm.
impact on Just Cause. Like
Mm-mm.
other than those faces are in the game, but he doesn't impact the story or the gameplay. He just gets to sit and nerd out, which he loved it. Like
Mhm.
I was like, he
Good for
is the
him.
nerd of this. I
Yeah.
know.
He's
But
the person. Yeah.
yes, if you need an accurate face, call that guy.
Mhm.
But like very different from like you said, like an indie team, right? Where you get to do lots of things and really affect the way the game goes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good example. That's really funny.
I know.
So another thing that I wanted to talk about was some of the negatives, and this isn't always a negative, but fans can be really intense in the games industry, and this kind of feeds into that whole culture thing that we were talking about. So there can be some really toxic parts of the game industry culture. Fans can be really intense. If you push back your game, people are not going to be happy about it. And sometimes that can go really intense. But on the flip side, fans can be so jazzed for your work. I mean, they are going to absolutely love their game if it's something they're committed to. So that can also feel really good. And the other thing that I want to talk about briefly, which can be kind of a negative in the games industry, just to be aware of, is that there is this concept of crunch time, and that basically means if you're getting to that point where okay, we're ending the sprints and like we're getting to the end of the production cycle, we're supposed to have this game out on XYZ date and we're really struggling to meet that deadline, your company might want you to do a thing called crunch. And that basically means dedicating every waking hour and probably sacrificing sleeping hours to get it done as fast as possible. And that's not really a healthy thing that the game industry does. And I hope that it changes rapidly. It's something that my school personally works towards, is making sure that no one does crunch time. No place that we get hired does crunch time, because it's really difficult, and it's something that could cause you, like Nat said, to just quit your job and not want to work in the industry anymore. So be aware of it. Be aware that it is a thing, just so that you know about it and you can avoid it if possible. Or
Yeah,
if you're fine with that, some people are fine with it. So just something to be aware of.
I always say I think, you know, it is a part of the game industry. I think if you're looking for jobs, you should look for jobs where it's the exception and not the rule.
Hmm.
And I have heard of studios that are quote unquote always crunching.
Hmm.
And that's really unsustainable for everybody. It's a recipe for burnout. And we don't want to lose brilliant creative minds.
Hmm.
So it's really to your own sustainable career to avoid crunch. It's not a weakness to say, I can't do it.
No, absolutely not. Um, and then just the last point on here that I want to touch on, which I kind of already did, you have to be willing to constantly learn in this industry because technology is constantly being updated, the industry changes. We just made our Snow Painters game in Unreal 4, and literally a few weeks later, Unreal 5 is out. So guess what everyone's going to be pivoting to? Unreal 5, no more Unreal 4. Of course, people will still use Unreal 4, but it's like, wow, we just got all this experience in Unreal 4, and now we're going to have to learn Unreal 5, aren't we? Yep,
Oh,
we sure
no.
are. So,
Oh, my gosh.
but that's just the industry. I mean, every
Yeah.
time an update comes out on anything, anytime a new VR headset comes out, anytime a new graphics card comes out, everyone's in a rush to be like, yes, I can use this. I know how to do it. And that'll get you more jobs, you know? So just something you have to be ready for is constantly learning new things, which can be really fun.
I love learning. I mean, I think that's another reason why I ended up here is
Hmm.
there's nothing like figuring something out and really getting a handle on something that when you first looked at it looked completely indecipherable.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
exciting.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about the games industry. Hopefully, you guys have a lot more knowledge about all the different roles that you can have, what to expect from actually working in the industry, and just have a little bit of more insight into the whole game design process.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I had a great time, Kaela. Thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah, this was super fun, Nat. Thanks so much.
Yay.